a narrow strip of land where mountains crash into the sea. The year is 480 BC, and the entire future of Western freedom is about to be decided. On one side, the most massive invasion force humanity had ever assembled, so enormous that ancient writers said they literally drank entire rivers empty. On the other side, just 300 warriors who knew they'd never see home again. This isn't just another battle story. This is the day impossibility became immortal. This is Thermopylae, the wound that wouldn't heal. Let's rewind a decade. The Persian Empire, stretching from Egypt's burning deserts to Central Asia's frozen wastelands, had tasted something bitter, something they'd never experienced before defeat. It happened at Marathon in 490 BC. Darius the Great, ruler of rulers, had sent his armies to crush Athens for daring to support rebel cities. Instead, Athenian warriors shattered Persian ranks on the beaches and sent survivors scrambling back across the sea in humiliation. For Darius, this wasn't just losing a battle. This was a scar on imperial honor that festered in the golden halls of Persepolis. He swore revenge, but death found him first. A son's inherited fury. Enter Xerxes, Darius's son, a man whose hunger for glory matched his empire's endless reach. But unlike his father's rushed expedition, Xerxes would gamble everything on absolute certainty. From 484 to 481 BC, the Persian machine mobilized for total war. Tribute poured in from every conquered land. Thousands of ships took shape in shipyards. Roads were carved through solid mountain to carry the endless tide of soldiers marching west. What assembled at Sardis defied human comprehension. Conservative modern estimates between 100,000 and 150,000 warriors. Ancient chroniclers claimed millions, probably exaggerated, but the psychological impact was real. Persian immortals in gleaming scale armor. Median cavalry thundering like earthquakes. Assyrian archers who could pin a butterfly to a tree at 100 paces. Egyptian marines. Scythian horsemen from the steppes, Indian war elephants, Phoenician sailors commanding 1,000 warships. This wasn't an army. This was empire incarnate, a living, breathing demonstration that resistance was futile. Meanwhile, chaos gripped Greece. For centuries, Greek city-states had spent more time fighting each other than anyone else. Unity, that was a fantasy. Every valley seemed to breed a different people with different gods, different laws, different grudges. But when you see the shadow of total domination creeping toward you, even blood enemies start talking. In 481 BC, something unprecedented happened. Representatives from across Greece gathered at Corinth to forge what history calls the Hellenic League. It was fragile, born from terror, not trust. But it united Athens and Sparta despite everything that divided them. Athens brought democracy, naval mastery, and radical thinking. Sparta contributed the most terrifying heavy infantry on earth. Here's the strategic nightmare the Greeks faced. How do you stop an empire when you're outnumbered 50 to 1? The answer: don't fight their fight. Use the land itself as your weapon. Thermopylae, the hot gates, was geography's gift to the desperate. Where the Calodramus Mountains plunged straight into the Malian Gulf, nature had carved a passage barely wide enough for a single cart. Any army marching south had no choice but to squeeze through this bottleneck. West side, cliffs rising like fortress walls unscalable. East side, the sea too rough for amphibious landings. In between, a strip so narrow that a handful of men could block it completely. This is where Leonidas would draw his line in the sand. Leonidas wasn't chosen randomly. At 60 years old, the Spartan king embodied everything his warrior culture worshiped, forged by the agoge. That brutal system that transformed 7-year-old boys into living weapons. Battle-tested, respected by peers, loved by his people. But here's what separated him from other commanders. Leonidas understood this mission's true purpose. He wasn't going to hold the past forever. That was impossible. He wasn't going to win a conventional victory. That was fantasy. He was going to send a message that would thunder across the ancient world. Free men would rather die standing than live kneeling. The 300 warriors who marched north weren't random volunteers. Each was a seasoned fighter in his prime. Each had been selected not just for skill with sword and spear, but because he had living sons to carry on his bloodline after he fell. These men knew the score. This was a one-way march. Yet, they moved forward with the calm that comes from absolute certainty. They weren't alone, though. 700 Thespians volunteered to share their fate, knowing exactly what that meant. 400 Theans were compelled to join, their loyalty questionable, but their presence politically necessary. Roughly 7,000 Greeks total would face the greatest war machine ever assembled. The journey north was part funeral procession, part triumph. In every village, crowds gathered, children threw flowers, women wept openly, old veterans straightened their bent backs, remembering what it meant to be Greek. These warriors carried more than bronze and iron. They carried the hopes of a free people who refused to bow. Word of the Spartan advance reached Xerxes as his vast host crossed from Asia into Europe. The Persian king's reaction, amusement mixed with irritation. A mouse challenging a lion seemed almost insulting. But something in the reports troubled him. These weren't refugees fleeing in panic. These were professionals marching deliberately toward suicide. The cultural chasm between these forces was as vast as their numerical gap. Persians fought for conquest, for their king's glory, for the wealth victory would bring. They were professionals from 100 nations, united by discipline and promised rewards. Greeks fought for something infinitely more dangerous, the right to live as free men. Every Spartan had been programmed since childhood to believe that death was preferable to dishonor. That retreat was unthinkable, that his individual life mattered less than preserving his way of life. Persian scouts examined the Greek position, searching for weaknesses and defenses that seemed almost comically simple. An old wall hastily reinforced behind it, bronze armor gleaming and steady men showing zero signs of panic. Xerxes sent emissaries under truce flags. The offers were magnificent, unimaginable wealth, positions of honor, the chance to rule fellow Greeks as Persian governors. All they had to do, lay down their spears and accept the inevitable. The response echoed through history. The Spartans had not marched 300 to surrender weapons to a foreign tyrant. As darkness fell over Thermopylae, the contrast between camps was staggering. In Persian lines, tens of thousands of cooking fires stretched to the horizon. Smoke rose like incense. Different languages mixed with the clatter of armor as soldiers from across the empire prepared for what they assumed would be brief one-sided slaughter. Behind the Greek wall, almost intimate by comparison, 300 Spartans sat in small groups, weapons laid out with ceremonial precision. They spoke little. These men, who'd known each other since childhood, trained together, fought together, and would now die together. Some polished their bronze until it gleamed like mirrors. Others combed their long hair with careful attention, warriors preparing for their final performance. Leonidas walked among them, speaking words that carried the weight of prophecy. They fought not for glory, but for their children's right to grow up free rather than enslaved. Every Persian killed here would be one fewer threatening the families they'd left behind. Priests moved through the lines, offering prayers. The Spartans performed ancient rituals, preparing them for death, anointing bodies, and dedicating weapons to the gods who governed mortal fate. They knew that by tomorrow's sunset, most would be dining in the halls of heroes. Morning mist rose from sulfur springs like departing spirits. The silence shattered with Persian war horns, haunting notes echoing off mountains like ancient gods summoning mortals to judgment. Xerxes positioned his golden throne on a hill overlooking the pass. Draped in purple silk surrounded by his personal guard, the King of Kings expected to witness a brief demonstration of Persian superiority followed by ritual execution of prisoners. The first wave mess incisions-capable fighters but not elite troops. Xerxes was saving his finest warriors for worthier opponents. Provincial troops would suffice to sweep aside this armed mob. The assault began with darkness. Thousands of composite bows sang in harmony, unleashing volleys that should have driven any sane defenders to cover. The Spartans didn't flinch. Their shields, bronze and wood forged by master craftsmen, caught Persian shafts like nets catching fish. Arrows that found gaps struck armor, fitted so perfectly they turned aside points that would have skewered lesser men. Behind their wall of metal and wood, Greek warriors waited with hunters' patience. When the arrow storm ceased, Median infantry charged with wild cries that had terrorized enemies from the Ganges to the Nile. Loose formation, wicker shields, short spears, absolute confidence that numbers would crush any resistance. They found bronze-clad death waiting. The moment Persians reached the wall, they discovered their greatest advantage had become fatal weakness. The narrow pass, barely 50 wide, meant only dozens of soldiers could engage Greeks at any moment. The vast army stretching to the horizon was reduced to its leading edge's strength. The Spartan phalanx operated like a perfectly calibrated killing machine. Each warrior's shield protected not only himself, but the man to his right, creating an unbroken bronze wall no individual heroics could penetrate. From behind this barrier, Dory spears thrust forward in deadly rhythm, seeking gaps in Persian armor or exposed flesh. Medes who reached the wall found themselves trapped in a bronze nightmare. They couldn't retreat. Their own comrades pressed forward from behind. They couldn't advance. Spartan spears kept them at a distance where shorter weapons were useless. They could only die. Xerxes watched from his throne as his first assault dissolved into chaos. Warriors who'd never known defeat broke against a defense that mocked the very concept of numerical superiority. The narrow ground that should have been Greek weakness became their strength, transforming a handful of defenders into an immovable object. His vast army couldn't simply overwhelm. Persian bodies piled before the Greek wall. Murmurs of unease rippled through Persian ranks. These were seasoned soldiers who'd witnessed the destruction of cities and collapse of kingdoms. Yet, they'd never seen methodical slaughter like this. Greeks fought with supernatural precision, like components of some great bronze engine designed purely for killing. Morning bled into afternoon. Wave after wave of Persian attackers broke against Spartan lines. Each assault began with confidence and ended with identical results. Broken weapons, scattered shields, screams of wounded men being dragged back from the killing ground. The narrow pass became a Carl house where Persian blood soaked Greek soil. Psychological cracks spread through the Persian host like fissurers in marble. These soldiers had followed Xerxes, believing in his invincibility, taught that Persian arms were blessed by gods and destined to rule the world. Now they watched that certainty crumble as comrades died in droves against an enemy, refusing to break or bend or show any human weakness. Leonidas moved among his warriors like a bronze deity. His voice carried encouragement that rang louder than clashing weapons. He fought in the front rank when needed, his spear finding Persian hearts with lifetime trained skill. But his greatest contribution wasn't personal prowess. It was maintaining the discipline that kept the phalanx intact under desperate circumstances. The Spartan king understood this battle was as much about morale as tactics. Every fallen Persian sent a message echoing far beyond Thermopylae. The mighty could be brought low. The inevitable could be defied. Free men possessed strength no empire could purchase or command. His warriors weren't just defending a mountain pass. They were demonstrating to the world that courage could triumph over overwhelming odds. By midday, the ground before the Greek wall was carpeted with Persian dead. The narrow space became so choked with bodies that fresh attackers climbed over fallen comrades to reach Spartan spears. Metallic blood scent mingled with sulfur springs, creating an atmosphere drawn from Hades itself. Yet attacks continued, driven by Persian pride and imperial ambition's terrible momentum. Xerxes had committed too much to accept defeat from such a small force. His reputation, his empire, his very identity as the god's chosen depended on crushing these insolent Greeks. Each failed assault only increased his determination. Afternoon brought new approaches. Persian commanders sought ways to break the deadlock, bleeding their army white. Coordinated attacks from multiple directions, the narrow ground prevented proper coordination. Overwhelming with sheer numbers, succeeded only in creating larger corpse piles. Nothing cracked the bronze shell of Spartan defense. As the sun descended toward western peaks, both sides assessed the carnage. Persians had lost thousands for exactly nothing. The pass remained blocked. Greeks remained defiant. The mighty army of Xerxes had been stopped cold by a force that could fit inside a small temple. Funeral pie flames would burn for days after the last Spartan fell, smoke rising toward heaven like prayers for the heroic dead. Thermopylae ended, as Leonidas knew it must, with Persian victory and Greek annihilation. Yet, in their defeat, the 300 achieved something far greater than survival. They shattered the myth of Persian invincibility. They lit a resistance fire that would consume an empire. The narrow path where they made their final stand became sacred ground, a testament to the truth that some things are worth more than life itself. Their sacrifice echoed through the ages, proving that when free men stand together against tyranny, even death becomes victory. The 300 didn't save Greece that day, but they showed Greece how to save itself. And that message, it's still thundering through history 25 centuries later. Because sometimes the greatest victory is simply refusing to kneel. If this story of impossible courage moved you, there's more to explore. The naval battle at Salamis, the final crushing of Persian dreams at Plataea, the legacy that shaped Western civilization. Hit that subscribe button because history's greatest stories deserve to be remembered.